Everybody, LK here, and today it's going to be a little bit of a quick one. This is actually about hardware, because I get this question a lot, especially with more recent fighting games. It's about what type of controller should I use? So the quick answer is, especially if you already watched the ad, use whatever you want. By this point, you've heard of people playing with steering wheels, you've heard of people playing with Guitar Hero controllers, blah blah blah. But the main peripherals people tend to use, I don't own all of them, I own a couple. You have your pads, pad players. You got sticks. Let me bring up Old Faithful right here. You got sticks. And then you have hitbox, which I don't have. I do not own a hitbox. Hitbox, if you're watching this, you could change that though. And keyboards, if you feel like it. Right? Those are probably the main four. So most people probably start with pad. I also started fighting games with pad. Pad, it's your pad. It's very small. They're not that expensive. The main thing is that it's what you're comfortable with and what you started using probably, especially as most fighting games these days come out on console. The main downside to pad, though, is if you use a special pad. So for example, when I started playing fighting games, I was using a PS1 controller. So once we started getting to like PS3 or something, I wouldn't be able to use it. By then I switched to stick, but just as an example. So the one thing is, besides PC, you're usually locked to whatever type of pad you're trying to use. So for example, if you're an Xbox One owner, all the tournaments are on PS4 at this point. So you'd either have to get an adapter. I do know a couple players who have adapters for their Xbox pads, or you have to make the jump to this buddy right here. Despite the cost being pretty low, it's a whole different grip, the buttons are different, blah blah blah, so you'd have to adjust to it. Now, I almost forgot the most important thing. So there's actually a couple of advantages to using pad too. I should talk about these things too. So one of the main advantages of pad is, I'll put the pad by the, right? So you could probably hear this, but if you're thinking about a tournament venue or something, it gets pretty loud in there. So it's pretty hard to actually hear pad inputs. Some tournaments, especially if you get far, if you get to stream setup, they're head-to-head, or you're playing with headsets or something, and it's really good. It's pretty quiet. Some games you could do some pad and left analog stick at the same time. Also, if you're super nerdy and go into that lane. So there's a bunch of good stuff about using pad. Pad is powerful. So 2 is the peripheral I'm the most familiar with, the lovely arcade stick. Right now my stick is kind of a Franken stick right now. This is my house stick now. Okay. So easily, the number one advantage to using a stick is that you can use it with pretty much whatever, especially if you build it for it. So if you get a PS4 stick, like this one, then you can play on PS3, you can play on PS4, and you can play on PC with the same controller. You can put in whatever parts you want. It's really easy to swap parts in and out. So you still have that preference thing, plus you can play on whatever, and you could actually borrow many people's sticks in case something happens to yours, as opposed to pads where that's like a nightmare. Borrowing someone's pad is a nightmare, but borrowing sticks, especially if something goes wrong, is pretty common. The other thing is, so back in the day, so when I picked up stick, the reason I picked up stick was because the most important tournament at that time was on arcades. I wanted to play at SBO, so that is an arcade tournament, so I had to learn how to play if I wanted to be serious. These days, you don't really have to. All the important tournaments are on console, so then the main thing you're going to be thinking about if you're doing this is pretty much preference. If you want to do this, one of the big advantages to this, of course, as you can see, all the buttons are flat faced, like they're right in front of you. So there's some inputs that are easier to do on stick than on pad. On the other hand, a lot of modern fighting games like Dragon Ball and Street Fighter V, they started with console, and Dragon Ball and another one is BB Tag, they're designed with console in mind, so they're made for pads. Mortal Kombat is another game. Mortal Kombat is made for pads. So an issue comes up where if it's like, let's say the last arcade fighter I played was Guilty Gear and Persona 4 Arena, so those games are made for arcades, so it's pretty easy, you just copy the layout. But for games like Mortal Kombat, like Injustice, like Dragon Ball, like Granblue is coming out, you have to literally come up with a layout for the game because the game is made for pad, which is a problem. But this is my personal preference. This is what I use. This is what a lot of people use just because they've used it for a long time. I do recommend it if you want to go that path. A disadvantage, there's a couple of big disadvantages to using stick. One is the actual lever. So your inputs will be nice and clean, but some things you'll just do a pinch slower than you could do on a pad or hitbox. The other thing is, of course, especially if you watch other videos and streams, the buttons are super loud, so your opponent can hear what you are doing, for better or worse. So the last one is actually keyboard / hitbox. To me, they're pretty similar. I'm going to be using a keyboard here, but to me, keyboard and hitbox are pretty much the same. The idea is the same, at least. So, hitbox to me is pretty much a keyboard. Honestly, it's pretty much a keyboard. So, the thing about hitbox, probably the biggest advantage of hitbox, because it's the same as a stick in that you have all the buttons flat, just like a keyboard. All the buttons are flat in front of you, so you could do negative edge inputs easily, stuff like that. But the really big advantage is, and I'm gonna try to not, maybe I'll like hit these, is numlock on? Let me turn off numlock, there we go. So the really big advantage here is that the directional inputs, and I know I'm pressing nonsense like an accordion, but the directional inputs are buttons also. So it is, let's say, super easy to guard things. Like crouch block, let's say, would be this. So an OS guard would be like that. That's all you have to do. As opposed to a stick, where this example of the stick inputs being slower, your OS guard would be like, it doesn't look like a lot, but it's more motion. It is more motion. So you could do directional things really quickly once you get used to using hitbox. It is a little awkward. I know people like have to practice for a while to get used to using hitbox, but once you do, your directional inputs are really good. I know there's some controversy with hitbox. I'll try to find something and put a link in the description about it. I know I read that there are different type of hitboxes and stuff like that. You might have to do a little extra research, but if you're technically, hitbox is the best option, I would say, for fighting games. Arcade sticks are like the classic option, and pad is like a nice compromise of classic plus really good and effective. Also, pad is the cheapest. One thing I'll definitely recommend is don't buy a cheap stick. If you're going to buy a stick, if you're going to buy a cheap stick, it should be because you're going to customize it. If you're going all in on a stick, don't buy a cheap stick. It's an investment. Be okay with spending money on a stick. Be okay with spending like $150 to $200 on a stick, because you're going to use it for years, hopefully, like 2 or 3 years, so it's worth it. Don't spend like $40 on a stick. It's bullshit. I bought a $40 stick before. I used it for about 2 seconds. I thought it was garbage, and then luckily a Melty Butt friend of mine hooked me up with an actual good budget stick. The old Namco from PS1 Namco sticks, those are amazing, but they don't really make sticks like that anymore. So if you're gonna buy a stick, be willing to drop money on a stick. Get a Hori, get a Kanba, get a Razor stick, drop the 200. It's worth it. It's just worth it. It's worth it, I promise. If you're gonna buy a pad, just buy a pad. You just buy a pad. If you're gonna buy a hitbox, I don't know that much about different hitboxes. I know people make their own custom stuff. If you want to hop into that, there's literally a company called Hitbox. You can buy theirs. As far as custom sticks, many people make custom sticks. You could literally search on Google, search on Twitter, and you'll find anything you want. So, if you have any additional questions, leave them in the comments. Please like and subscribe to this video if you liked it. I'll have other videos here as usual, and I'll see you next time.